Can we not afford more than one microphone?
No, we're public school.
All right, the following questions are more tailored to your fields and experience.
Yes.
Dr. Fair, what evidence do you see of the impact of language shortcuts on oral communication, and how do you combat these issues in class?
Definitely has a huge impact on the oral communication aspect. Several of you in here have been through my classes, whether it be the intro or business speech class, and I haven't been teaching that long, 7 years, but from when I started to now, you see how much even just the textbooks change in the language they use and different things they address. They never talked about social media in my textbooks when I first started teaching. And now you can't not talk about it and the language you use and what you're posting and things like that. So it's interesting to see, just in my own field, the explosion of research and tips and tricks and trying to deal with it and how you teach your students to flip that switch off and on. It's a battle, and I think it's something probably all of our fields have in common, is how do we respond to it and interact with it and work with students with it. All of my chapters, or all of my textbooks have chapters on verbal communication. How do you use your language, and like what Dr. Kuhnler said, the elegance of language and those powerful speeches you know and are forced to memorize in your classes, whatever they may be, or read through, they're gorgeous. They just have this language and this flow that comes across, and you're not going to get that with abbreviations. You're not going to be a speech that's remembered if that's all the content that you're using. If you don't pull your audience in with that language, you're never going to get your message across. With nonverbal, it's the gestures you make and what you may be communicating and not realizing you're communicating to an audience, whether it be through eye contact or the way you dress, things like that. And as we were talking earlier, of course, you have to talk about technology and how it's used. There's a chapter in my business text about email is blah, blah, blah. Netiquette is considered da-da-da-da-da. And you think it's very straightforward. You don't realize that you need to define what electronic mail is in a book, but some students still are not to that level where they use technology all the time. So you've got a mix of super technology users, have it all the time, always on their computer, on their phones, and then I have students where I have their email account for the first time. They've never had one. So from teaching, it becomes first with the outlines and putting things together. So we do have that written element in my class. You've got to start there with what type of language you use, getting away from the casual, throwing something on a sheet of paper, posting it like we do, using abbreviations, contractions, things like that. And then it comes to the speaking part of it. And I think that's really difficult for students to realize. There is a difference between how you communicate, talk to your friends, talk to your parents, and then getting up to give a formal presentation. And I'm wondering if that's not one of the reasons people fear public speaking so much, because it's different. Sitting in a classroom, sitting like you guys are right now, just turning to chat to somebody next to you, not a big deal. Doing group work, no problem. But to stand alone and communicate your words to an entire crowd staring at you is different. We get it. I know I'm the weirdo where it's no big deal and this is my world. And I try and convey that to my students. You're not alone in this fear. But you have to realize there's a professionalism that goes in that communication to draw that audience in, to get your message across for them to believe you. If you're using slang, if you're using text jargon, it almost comes across as you're not serious. Or you haven't taken the time to express what you mean with your language. You're taking that shortcut. And you're cheating your audience out of what you're really trying to do. So that's one thing you definitely don't want to do, is blow off your audience or make them feel like they weren't worth the effort to find those dollar words to include in your speech. You took the grunt out and got through your speech, and that's the end of it. Because you're going to have to communicate, whether it's giving public speeches or just doing an interview. You've got to be able to clearly communicate your intent, to sell your ideas to your boss, whatever it is, to convince them of your point of view and what you're trying to convey, and that your information is valuable. So you got to know when the right time is and who's the right person to use that type of language with, but don't discard the effort in putting a pretty paper together or using this language because we see it and we know the effort it takes to put something great together, and for me, I respect it. So I love that kind of work when it comes from my students.
Dr. McBee, what evidence do you see of the impact of language shortcuts on written communication, and how do you combat these issues in your class?
I think the thing I see most often in students writing is that texting is so immediate, and it's quick and it's done. And so I see that kind of transfer over into writing where there's not this care taken. I wouldn't say so much I see texting language in written communication, but there's not care given to it. It's like, I'm going to sit down and write this, I'm done with it, let's move on. And there's not really attention given to, let's work with this piece of writing, let's craft it, let's get it in the best shape it can be. It's like, let's do it, move on. And that's bothersome. The other thing, and I kind of approached this idea of written communication a little differently, and then the biggest problem I see, I think because of some of the shortcuts, is it kind of taps into critical thinking skills. This semester especially, and I've been teaching a long time, about 17, 18 years, I'm starting to see students not have the ability to read the directions of something and understand what it says and follow through with those directions. And so that kind of that critical thinking that's required to analyze is kind of going out the door. I've had one assignment I've given several times over the years. This is the first semester I've seen students misread the question and consistently all of them answering it incorrectly because they just didn't pay close attention to what was written. And that is troublesome because you're going into the workplace from where we are. You know, it's crucial to understand directions and be able to follow them and analyze them, excuse me, and understand what's required. So I think from that aspect, with the written communication and just the immediacy of texting and of the shortcuts plays into all of that. The other thing I find too with students, I always emphasize, take notes on what we're talking about in class. Refer back to your notes if you have questions. Bring them in, let's talk about them. And I don't have students take notes. And a lot of times they'll say, well, the notes wouldn't help me. I'm like, well, how do you know if you didn't take the notes? Because I'm going over the exact same thing I've said in class to you. And so kind of this, I can't be bothered with the note taking. Why would you take notes in English? That's crazy you do that in history. This is a response. This is a response I get. It's like, you know, that's so crucial to your academic goals, to be able to hear, to take in that information, to refer to it, to have it at your disposal. And texting is kind of this, you know, in and out kind of deal, and we're done and we're moving on. So those are the things I see. To combat that, you know, I try to emphasize the importance of let's analyze, let's see what these directions are asking, let's follow through, let's make sure we understand. And I just have to mention this, it kind of falls into what we were talking earlier about the evolution of things. This semester I decided, you know, I've been fighting this thing, students texting in my class. I've talked to students, they say it doesn't bother them. If other students are texting, I thought, let's throw it out, let's just do it. So I told students this semester, you want to text, knock yourself out, as long as you're not obsessive with it. And I have seen the downfall of one of my students because of that decision I made, where all I see is this phone and the student's head down and texting, and I'm just watching her spiral all the way down. And I feel a responsibility for that. I'm trying to talk to her about it, but it's like one connected thing. I mean, it's almost excessive. And interestingly, other students have not used that, use it sparingly. They're really attentive, but the ones that are so involved with it is just detrimental. And that's a major concern for me.